Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How CGI Modernize Technology and Culture for Continuous Software Delivery. In this webinar, please feel free to go ahead and ask questions as we go through. We'll be addressing questions at the end. This will be recorded and available for offline viewing as well. And we also have some content at the end to kind of share with you after today's session. So let's just go ahead and introduce our presenters today. My name is Mark Lambert. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Parasoft. And I'm joined by my good friend, Fernando Martinez, who's the Director of Consulting, Banking and Financial Services at CGI. Fernando, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, I am the same guy in the picture, only with longer hair because of COVID. I have a lot of experience in IT, more than 25, almost 30 years now in IT. I started in mainframes, AS400, in all these platforms that now is called legacy. And I do a long transition to innovation, working in innovative ideas and new technologies, especially in the quality area, in QA and testing. And a little bit, this is a project that I am in charge now that resume all this experience from legacy to new technologies.
Great, thank you very much, Fernando. And before we get into talking specifically about CGI and what you guys have been doing and the journey that you went through, let's go ahead and actually just talk a little bit about the industry and what is the drive for modernization and the drive for continuous software delivery. And these two are very tightly interconnected, obviously. Really, most people, when you first start talking about modernization, they're thinking DevOps, they're thinking Agile, and that's a key element of what we're going to be talking about today. But we have to step back for a second and think about, well, why are we doing those things in the first place? The obvious thing is we want to get there first. We want to get to the market. And we want to be able to present something that allows us to grow our market share, preserve and retain existing customers, as well as potentially enter into new markets. So getting there first is often the biggest push towards continuous software delivery and the modernization of your software development pipeline and process that's required to enable that. Now, one of the things you need to remember that reduced time to market isn't that I'm going to get everything done in a very, very quick way. What you're actually doing is you're doing lots of little iterative releases, and you're doing those to validate the market, validate your use cases, and get feedback. You're going to see that as a key element of the whole modernization process. One of the next things is actually starting to take advantage of new market potential. So open banking is an area that I know, Fernando, you're being very well exposed to at CGI. But really, the concept of service platforms, open banking being a financial service platform, but also the idea of data sharing and leveraging services as a market and a business, it goes beyond financial services. We've also seen a revolution in healthcare over the last 18 months, obviously, with COVID accelerating that. But even prior to that, we saw patient-specific care programs. We've seen regulation from the US government around access to patient data. We've actually seen GDPR in Europe, obviously also kind of making data and access to data a key component of centralized business models. So that movement towards service platforms and APIs powering those requires a retooling of your development process, retooling of your architecture to be able to take advantages of those new business opportunities. And as we do that, as we're trying to get to the market first, as we're trying to expose or get access to those new markets, the customer needs to be the center of what we're developing. Really, if we think about the changes over the last 2 or 3 decades, really IT delivered solutions have been designed so that they are easy to use, easy to adopt, and easy to switch as well. So moving from one system to another the switching costs have never been lower. And really, this means that you need to have the customer at the center of what you're developing to make sure that they're delivering what they actually need and what they want, but also delivering things quickly so that you can get this feedback that we were talking about just a few moments ago. So these are kind of like the three key drivers that we see within the industry that are pushing organizations to modernize across the board their different projects and the different applications that are available. And really, this is reiterated with recent research from Forrester. They delivered at the beginning of this year their tech tide around continuous software delivery, talking about how continuous software delivery is critical to make sure that your organization is going to be successful. And that means growing and retaining your customers, delivering a truly delightful experience where your customers, be them a B2B or B2C type of relationship, doesn't matter. You want to make sure that your customers are able to achieve the goals that they want to, and you need to be able to do it in a more competitive way than the others that are out in the market trying to disrupt your core businesses. So as organizations are looking to retool, you're retooling your entire tool chain, you're retooling your process, and you're figuring out how to leverage your resources and your culture to be effective in a very competitive market. So you're moving from these large annual or infrequent releases to lots of smaller releases so that you can get feedback as quickly as possible, get feedback from your end users and your customers, putting them at the center of what you're delivering so that you know that you're delivering true value to the business, which is all about how to grow your customers, retain your customers. And for us, also identifying as one of the key takeaways in this report, that testing tools are a key area of investment. We're obviously going to talk about testing across the board today and how you need to modernize that testing culture, but tools are a key area for you to enable that. It's not the place where you want to start, and we're going to talk about that today, but it's a key component to streamline the process. And Forrester specifically call out API testing and automated testing wherever possible, and we'll touch upon that as well today. So if we think about what do we mean when we're talking about modernization and kind of the things that have happened over the last 3 decades, I'm sure this list is pretty consistent across our audience today. Moving from waterfall-centric development methodologies to agile and DevOps. How can I get the quickest thing out to the market, but also how can I it's not only streamline that delivery, but streamlining the feedback so I can actually change direction. That's what agile means, is that I'm taking a little piece, I get feedback, and then I change my direction so that I make sure I hit the target of what my customer needs. Obviously, moving from a manual build process to continuous integration. I know 15, 16 years ago, when I first started at Parasoft, we were talking about CI, and that was really just the thought leaders in the industries that were really adopting that. That is now, that's baseline, right? Continuous integration, if you're not doing that today, you really are kind of stuck in a 30 years ago development process. Dedicated build servers have gone away. Now we're moving to dynamic build infrastructure where I can build at any time, anywhere, leveraging cloud-based platforms like GitHub, GitLab, leveraging technology like Docker and Kubernetes to dynamically spin up the infrastructure, because the infrastructure has also got more kind of interconnected and broken apart. We've moved away from centralized mainframes. While mainframe is still very important and still a key component of almost any commercial transaction that's happening in today's market, it is a lesser component from the point of view of the broader ecosystem. Microservices really driving the ability to deliver innovative services and components that are decoupled from that mainframe. So you're not stuck on a mainframe as your only compute power with a thick client, single desktop UI, green screen. We're now talking about multi-channel interactions with my applications, web, mobile, and API. So non-UI or headless driven interactions with backend systems that enable kind of B2B operations or enable your citizen developers to expose or leverage your services, your capabilities. We've moved from that annual release to multiple releases a year. It doesn't mean to say everybody's doing continuously, but you're going to find what release methodology or what release cadence is going to work for your organization. 4 times a year, 2 times a month, very typical. Some organizations will be continuous, right? So that's your Netflix, Facebook, Amazons of the world, delivering small incremental changes to their application as soon as the development team has implemented the work. They push it through an automated pipeline, through DevOps, ends up out in production. And obviously, testing is a key component to make sure that that change that's made, doesn't matter how small it is, but making sure that it is not disruptive to the core business use cases. So manual testing can't keep up, so we have to switch towards an automated and continuous testing practice where you're not at just a phase and you're not doing testing at the end of a release cycle, but you're really doing it continuously. You're doing it in sprint for the work that you're doing today, as well as re-executing your regressions continuously. So you're shifting the testing left into the development process, but you're also shifting the testing right, because there are going to be some things that you can't test all of the use cases in your pre-production environment, and there are going to be specific use cases which are actually very potent and potentials for leveraging shift right testing, or goodness forbid, testing in production. And you really have to, these two things, it's important that you want to balance these and you want to apply them in the right ways. Don't just go to shift right and say, hey, that's the thing we want to do. We're not going to do any testing before we go to production. That's obviously a recipe to disaster. The key thing here is it's both. It's shift left, test in sprint, as well as shift right and test production. Very much a change in the way, in the process that we're applying for testing in today's modern world. And the list goes on. You, I'm sure, can think of 4 or 5 additional things which have changed over the last 30 years. I know we had a very colorful conversation about this internally within Parasoft as we were talking about kind of what has evolved. But the key thing is, you want to look at this and you say, look, if I need to transform from this 30-year-old software development process into these modern elements, what do I need to do to make sure that that modernization effort is going to be successful? And really, it's taking into consideration the 3 key elements of any software development practice. First, the people, and the people are the most important component, because this is where the knowledge and the expertise, the domain knowledge is really key in any organization. And here, when you're thinking about modernization, it's communication and collaboration, making teams work better together, figuring out how you can leverage people's specific skills and expertise in new ways as we start to evolve our process. So our process now is not monolithic. It's not, go through my requirements phase, go through my development phase, go through my test phase, go through deployment, and then the project is done, and we'll come back to it again in a couple of years. We're iterative. We're doing all of this very quickly. We're realizing that our requirements are going to change based upon the feedback that we get from our customers, maybe based on the feedback that we get from the process. So the only way that we can actually make this work, and we'll make it work in a commercially viable and efficient way, is by automating. So here we want to automate as much as possible. And the goal of this is to automate your delivery so you can get the functionality out into production, so you can get the feedback, so you know you've built the right thing for the right people. So how do these 3 things come into testing? Well, when we're talking about people, the key change is you've got teams, not divisions or groups. So it's dev and test together, not dev versus test. There's no throwing over the wall of what was delivered to the testing team and then the testing team throwing it back. Quality is a shared responsibility in the modernized software development organization. It's also, from a process perspective, testing isn't left until the end of the cycle. It's done in sprint. Your team is now working together. You're testing figuring out what the best way is to test a particular piece of functionality, correlating that to the work that the development team are doing. So correlating your test activities to the user stories and optimizing your testing process, because you are going to run out of time. A sprint is typically 2 to 3 weeks. You don't have the ability to run a complete regression in those 2 to 3 weeks at the end of the cycle. What you want to do is figure out how I can optimize my testing practices so that I can get feedback during development on the quality. And the key thing here is going to be executing those tests continuously. So you want to be able to optimize your test automation, optimize your regression, and run those tests continuously. API testing is a key enabler for you here. Service virtualization is also a key component that's going to help you streamline the continuous testing activities and turn your automated tests, which have to run on a scheduled basis, into continuous tests that can be running fully. Now, we'll have some more content to talk about here at the end of the webinar today. I'll have some white papers that you can consume as well. But I'd actually like to take this opportunity now to actually switch over to Fernando. So Fernando, let me go ahead and make you presenter. Okay, and I'm going to turn off my camera, and then I think, right, there we go. Okay, we can see you.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you, Mark. Mark has defined very clear what is the objective. The problem is how to arrive to that objective. And in order to understand this journey that we have, I need to explain a little bit about CGI and the organization and the application. And I will start for the company. CGI, maybe some of you knows about this company, is a Canadian company. Our headquarters is in Montreal. Is by far the biggest IT company in Canada. We have 77,000 employees and members, consultants. We have 400 offices in 40 countries, and our revenue is more or less in the order of 12 billions per year. That we position us in between the 5th and 6th companies by size in the consultancy area. And CGI is not only a consultant company, but also we produce software that we sell our CGI brand, but they are very specific software. In this particular case, I am talking about a wealth management package for big financial institutions to manage their wealth management organizations and structure, and that is sold as a CGI software. And this software is being very, very successful. It processes 275,000 transactions per day or more. This is a kind of really calm day. We manage 365 billion assets billion of dollars in assets in the administration of the software, and we have more or less 5.5 million accounts. This is a very successful software. The thing is that this software is a legacy software. It works, essentially a batch processing software with a big API layer that was built with time. It has still a lot of green screens, and there is auxiliary systems, and also not only the clients connect with the software, but also other organizations. That means that this software is the epitome of a legacy software. It runs in a mainframe / AS400 infrastructure with green screens, is 1.5 million lines of COBOL, mostly COBOL, near 2,000 tables. This COBOL has to be migrated to Java. We are migrating all these tables to Oracle, and we are talking about several terabytes of data of mission critical financial information. Also, this application operates in a very regulated market. We have 4 releases per year, and at least 2 of these releases every year has regulatory implicances, or there are modifications in taxes. That means that there are very hard release dates. We also have near 300 APIs made with SOAP technology, some with REST technology, and we have a portion of this API that is open to our clients, and our clients connect their system directly through the API with this software package. We have near 200 green screens that the objective of the project was migrated to Angular 9. And this auxiliary system mostly are defined for reporting and communicating with external entities, non-client organizations and client organizations. More or less, we are talking about a medium-sized system, 100,000 lines of code of Java. And also, it connects also with very legacy system, mainframes and applications like that in our client organizations in order to share information. And these systems will not be changed by the client. That means that whatever the current legacy system is connected with these legacy applications of the client, the new system has to connect with this legacy application. And also, well, we have non-client external organizations. We have communication with this external organization through SFTP, APIs, and MQ. Okay, this is kind of, probably you will ring a bell in this, because this is a typical legacy application, mission critical, not easy to change, very difficult to manage. And also, this is only one leg of the tree, because as Mark has said, we have the technology, the process, and the culture. And a legacy system is not legacy only for the technology. It's legacy also because of the processes. The process were really stuck in the past. Most of the people that were working in this application were people that has worked there for 20 years, COBOL programmers, manual testers. They know really well the business aspects of the application. They know really well the intricacies of the code and the database. And they are very comfortable in that environment. That means that we have also very little unitary testing on the batch core, mostly because COBOL and these kind of environments, they are not very good for modern unitary testing tools. The tracking of the test case were not as good as we desire. They were using mostly Excel. And the problem with using Excel for test cases is that it's difficult to know what is happening, and also it's very difficult to reuse test case. And the defect management process was not as good as it should be. They were following a really formal process when they arrived to UAT and production, but not in dev and in QA. The other problem is that the culture was very waterfall oriented. There was nothing similar to DevOps there, and it was vertically oriented. Every group was working in vertical niche. We have development, we have QA. Development finished to do the development, they pass the code to QA, and now QA has to manage everything. And then we have DVMs that were completely separated of the QA. They were communication, but they were talking, not working together. Okay, and of course, operations was really managing the same way. The thing is that management was really clear from the very beginning to say to us, a change of technology alone is a failure. The only way that this is considered a success is when we finish, the new system not only has Java instead of COBOL, is not out of the AS400, but now in a Linux environment, with a new database, with a new architecture of API, but also the processes and the culture has already changed. And the thing is, what we have to do? Well, I will tell you what we did. It's not the recipe, following recipe, but it's our experience, and in our case, it worked. First, we consider the most important thing is the change of culture. If you change the culture, the technology is a low-hanging fruit. And the first thing we did is to we eliminate this idea. Most of these projects that I saw in clients and in previous employers was we have the old technology, the old project that is delivering every 3 months their releases, and we create in parallel a new project, a new group that has the new technology, the new culture, completely different people, sometimes in a completely different building with perks Google-like. And we say we don't like to do that, because the problem of doing that is that the new group doesn't know the business as well as the old group, the group that is working in the old technology. And also the group that is in the old technology is kind of feeling like second-class citizens. They are in the, hopefully not, but sometimes dingy old offices when all these guys, new guys, are receiving all the perks, and they're feeling that when they finish, when these new guys finish the project, they will be discarded, and that generates a lot of problems, a lot of friction that is unnecessary, and also is unrespectful of all these people that during 20 years has made this system be a success. What we did is we created the 2 tracks in the same building, in the same floor, and we do a cross-pollination between the two. And the teams, the people were switching between the teams all the time. In one release, one group was working in the COBOL and the things, and of course the COBOL programmers became instantly Java programmers, but at least they will participate and work with the Java developers in order to transfer the knowledge and the culture, and vice versa. The Java developers were going and work with in the releases in order to understand how the business work and how the things are working. But the key was that everybody was in the same place. Everybody was one desk near the other. The other thing is, in the past, there were intentions to change this system and they failed. What we're very clear from the very beginning is say, okay, this time it will happen. And as the project will advance, the old guard, we can say, became convinced that this will happen this time. Oh, this is progressing, this is advancing. Neither of all the other projects in the past were so advanced in the transformation. We feel that we are participating. We know that we will have a future when this old system became history and we will be working with the new technology, and that make the system to participate. The other thing is the team that come, myself, that is I didn't have working with them in the past. We were very open. Also the PM, the project leader of the system of this transformation program was very open to hear what the legacy developers and legacy BAs and the QA teams has to say, and we were really ready to transform our process and adapt our process to the needs of these particular projects. We always hear them, and this is very important. And you will see I will talk a lot about the culture, because it's the most important part of this. The people that the legacy developers, the legacy team, has to feel that is here and their opinion matters. The other thing was skills over knowledge. When we start to talk with them and say, okay, maybe you are a COBOL developer, but you like to do the transition to Java, we will help you, we'll do the training, we'll help you with the certifications, but also your skills, your knowledge is very valuable. And we follow this, we reuse their skills and their knowledge in new roles in order that know that, well, when I don't have any more COBOL lines of code to maintain, I know where I will go in the new team, and I know what my role will be, because I am doing partially this role all this time. And finally, a lot of training. Training was our mantra. And also, I will going back when I was explaining what is the critical success factors of this program. But I will say training is the key for all this. In terms of process, we were rigid in certain things. For example, we say, this is the way that we agree with them. We modify our process, say, okay, this is the process that everybody has agreed. Once that the process is there, we say, if you don't follow the process, you have to justify it. You have to convince me why you didn't follow and what is the consequences of this. This is an exception, or this is something that our process is incorrect and we need to modify it. And if we need to modify, we will really open to do it. We will do it all together. But there were two main directives. First is automation first. A functional testing is not complete if I don't see the script. I will never say this test case pass until I don't see the test automation script that has passed. That manually pass is not valid for me. Of course, that at the beginning was painful because it took longer. The first series of tests in the first sprints takes longer. Yeah, but it pays off a lot in the future. And the other thing that we say is pipeline first. There is no deployment. There is no regression testing that we can tick and say is done until I don't see the pipeline working. Okay, and sometimes we have milestones that we say, okay, we cannot reach, not because we couldn't do the deployment or we couldn't do the regression testing, because the pipeline was not there. You have to be ready to say to your VP or to your upper management, no, I didn't reach the milestone because the pipeline or the test automation is not ready. It's painful at the beginning, but in the end, it pays off a lot. Of course, knowledge and experience has its place. Manual testing has its place. And we discovered that as we were progressing with the test automation, we discovered that the perfect place for exploratory testing. Exploratory testing is really good to find things that we didn't think of. As when you create all the test cases, you document the test cases in Jira, X-Ray, whatever tool you have, and the exploratory testing is there for discover all the things that the test automation we couldn't discover, and it's really in the end we are now encouraging developers, QA, and BAs to go and play with the system. And if the only discipline that they have to have is if they discover a defect, they have to create the defect and also define the test case of how this defect was found and all the steps that arrive to this defect. And then we create immediately a test case, a script that is part of our regression testing. But you always have to reserve time for exploratory testing. Finally, technology. We have a very clear Jira architecture, And when I am referring to Jira architecture, is you don't throw Jira to the team and say, oh, you have to use Jira or X-Ray for testing management. You have, when you are talking about the Jira architecture, we're referring to the relationship between epics, user stories, tasks, tests, and defects, and including test plan and test execution. How all these connect each other, how when I create a defect, the defect has to be connected to one particular test case, and also how I manage the test repository. This is a concept that comes with X-Ray and allows us to organize all the tests in a clear repository, and then every time that we have a new release or a new sprint, we can pick up the test that we need to run. And if we modify, we add a new test cases because of this particular release of the particular sprint, we go back and put the test case in the repository. The other thing is we standardize in Gherkin because it was a way to protect our investment, all the things that we created in terms of test case. What we did is all the specifications were defined in Gherkin, because Gherkin is kind of a lingua franca and there is a lot of different tools that can use Gherkin. That means that in the future, if I decide to change my test automation tool or my environment or my framework for test case for test generation, I have my investment protected, written the specifications in Gherkin. And finally, we steal ideas everywhere, from our team, from other teams that were doing other things in other groups, and from clients and competitors. Okay, and why we were successful, why we can say now we are successful in this transformation. I believe that there's 5 points that were the most critical ones. First one was, it was one team. We didn't have this separation between the old world and the new world. Nobody felt left behind. Everybody was part of the future, and everybody gave their best to be part of that future. And we have a lot of cross-pollination between the business as usual, the old world, and the tech transformation program, the guys that were creating this new software. And it was a big morale boost, because these guys started to feel that they have a place in the future, a place in the new technologies, a place in this war of digital transformation that is coming. For them was a big morale boost. We have a very hands-on management. My boss was really an expert in DevOps, and he wasn't writing, of course, he wasn't writing the pipelines himself, but he was very involved in defining the architecture of the pipelines. And I was a QA program manager, and I was very involved in the definition of the architecture of Jira and X-Ray, or how the objects connect. And I was creating the reports all the time, and looking at the reports and asking the right questions based on the report that we're having. That means that we were heavily involved in that, and it was the case on all the management, the architects, everybody was really involved in the process and working hands-on in what was happening. Maybe not writing Java lines of code, but we were very involved in the architecture. The other thing was this emphasis on culture over technology. And this is the key phrase, and I repeat it because I said it like 5 minutes ago. They say, if you win the culture battle, the technology is a long-hang fruit. You can pick it there. If the old team and the new team are working together, and they feel that this is a common purpose and a common project, the technology, you can solve any technological problem that you can have. this is kind of a surprise. COVID was a factor of success. I looking in retrospective now, because yes, we're starting to work all together, but then it came COVID, we have to move out, everybody working from home, but the focus that we have, because we were working from home and we didn't have a lot of distractions, especially when we have to develop software, when we have to define architectures, when we have to write test cases, was really, really important. And the productivity that we have in this task that needs a lot of concentration was really high, really, really high, way higher than we can have in a shared space of an office. The problem was the how to interact, how to have an ideas. We use Team, and in the end, we were really surprised ourselves with the level of. At the beginning was a little bit more difficult, but then the interactions, the communication between us, it was very good, and we could share ideas and do brainstorming through Teams very well. Not perfect, not as good probably if we were working all together, but in terms of the project, it was compensated by the focus that we went from working from home. And finally, training. And I will have an anecdote about that. The first time that we explained Jira and X-Ray to my team, I did a training, 2 hours. I explained how Jira works and say, okay, start to work. We'll work in 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks we'll come back. They have a lot of problems because first time that I see a tool like Jira is kind of overwhelming at the very beginning. But there were a lot of mistakes, but they were learning. When we come back in 2 weeks, I did exactly the same training, And the guys started to realize, oh, you are saying this because of that. They have an enriched learning experience because they have 2 weeks of experience using the tool themselves. And they make a lot of questions. We have 2 weeks more. In these 2 weeks, they continue to work. They made a lot less mistakes. And then 2 weeks later, we did exactly the same training. Small differences in order that they don't sleep in the training, but more or less it was essentially the same thing. And at that moment was one of the cultural moments, because they started to say, aha, now was the aha moment. Now I understand why you are saying this, why you are building the things in the way that you are building. And they made a lot of questions, but they made a lot of proposals. And this is the most important thing. When a person learns, when he can provide modifications, he can propose modifications of what he has learned. And this was the most rich portion of the training. And when we finished this third training session, we realized the guys not only has learned, but they are proposed a lot of modifications that make our process better, and they are completely working with us. They know what they are doing. They work and they are happy what we are doing. And I believe this is the best moment of all, when you say, okay, the culture that we are trying to impose, that we are trying to put in this project is there, and they started to be assimilated by the team. Okay, Mark, it's up to you.
Great, thank you very much, Fernando. I think there was some really, really valuable and interesting lessons learned there. So just as we transition to Q&A here, so go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A box. We've got a few good ones here queued up, so I'll cut those in a moment. Just a couple of things. If you want to learn more about the test automation technologies that kind of fits into this workflow here, we'll talk about the technology stack in these couple of assets here. So we have a couple of documents for you to download and see some details around the technologies that Fernando was leveraging and his teams were leveraging from a testing perspective. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead now and transition to questions.
So let me see here. Okay. Can you guys see me okay now? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so a couple of questions here. Let me see where we can start. You answered this a little bit during the session, but let's go into a little bit more details. The question was, what was the technology stack you deployed? You touched on X-Ray and Jira. Do you want to touch upon some of the other elements as well?
Yes. In terms of the technology of the application itself, we replaced our COBOL and RPG through Java. The database was changing from DB2 for AS400 to Oracle. And of course, we eliminate the AS400 and we put everything over Linux. The API stack or shield over the application itself, it was migrated mostly to REST. And we did some transformations in several of the applications, because here we say, okay, this legacy application is the core, and we have several layers of applications that we're going and communicate with it and with external clients. And some of them were also changed. All the green screens, of course, has to disappear, and they were transformed in Angular 9. Now we are migrated to Angular 10 over web. In terms of process, that is the most important part, is, well, we're moving from manual testing, Excel as a test management tool, to Jira using X-Ray plugin. And the test automation, we use SOA test for all the testing of the API. That is kind of 80% of all our testing. And we are using our own framework based on Cucumber for the UI. Okay. And we have a couple of tools. We created our own tool to compare reports between S400 and the report generated by Oracle. And we were doing also, we have a tool from another company to compare whole databases that we use only for the transition, that we compare what we have in the Oracle database and what we have in the AS400 database after we run exactly the same process. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And I think we only have a few more minutes for questions, but there's one here that, so maybe they'll pick out 2 or 3 more, but there's one here which I think directly relates to one of the things you just said. So big transformation, a lot of technology changes. The question here is, how did your company help the individual members do the transition? For example, from manual tester to test automation, from programmer of COBOL to Java. So maybe you could, that sounds like there's a pertinent question to ask right now.
Yeah. Well, some of the programmers, they say, okay, I'm ready to move to Java. I like to continue to be a programmer. And we help with the transition, with the certifications, with the training and all the stuff. Some of them say, no, I'm not interested in moving to Java technology. I don't like to be a programmer anymore. And what we did is, they have a big knowledge about the application, and what we did is transform them or in people that specialize in the definition of the test cases, QA definition of test cases, and doing the exploratory testing at the end. And several of them, they become part of the BA team, because one of the things that will happen is that your development and your QA team reduce slightly in size. Sometimes it's compensated because you have more scope to cover. You start to cover a lot of scope that before you didn't have the time, and you start to put more emphasis on what the client wants, and you have more people that knows the system and know the business to attend the client and to attend what the client needs, and create the future modifications in a shorter cycle, because you are moving from a whole waterfall to an agile world.
Yeah, and getting an understanding of those user stories and the business requirements or the user requirements is key for the process, for the agile process to work effectively. I think we have time for one more question. So there's some great questions here. Maybe we pick off. Okay, so yeah. So what was the biggest resistance to change, and how did you overcome it?
Okay, the biggest change is the biggest resistance is culture always, and is the transition of for example, the developers has the tendency to in the old waterfall. Oh, I finished the code. Okay, it's not my problem anymore. Call me only if you have a defect, and doesn't have this concept of quality is a shared task. I am part of the quality process. And also from the size of the QA, try to say, okay, if you do these things in different way, maybe the quality will improve. This sharing idea, this is this is not my responsibility. That was the most difficult change, and of course trying to adapt to the new tools. Why I have to do as much detail in Jira, put all this information about the test cases. I have Excel and it works. So you say, yeah, well, but it's not work for everyone. It's working only for you, and that's a problem. Okay, that was when you move the culture to the process, because the process is the culture in action. There you see the biggest challenges. People adapt to this culture and say, okay, I will follow this process.
Yeah, and I think your point right there is that quality is a shared responsibility. This is actually how Agile and DevOps can actually help you improve your overall software quality deliverables, because it's not a siloed activity anymore. It's integrated into that team workflow. So thank you, Fernando. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. As I said, some great questions. We'll follow up with those offline as well. If you have any further information or questions you would like, we posted the QR code earlier. The slides are available as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon, Fernando.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.